Hello? Okay. Yep. All right, that sounds good. Okay, I'll tell them. Bye. All right, Bio 30s, looks like it's time for another lesson. Today we're going to talk about characteristics of population change and how we actually measure population change over time. So the first thing we want to look at here is the formula for population density. So population density is simply just how many organisms are in an area at a given time. So the density is simply N, which is the number of individual organisms, divided by A, the area, or V, the volume, depending on what we're talking about, whether it be area or volume. So to figure out how dense something is, you would take the number of organisms in that area and divide by the total area. Now, organisms can be distributed in a couple of ways. You might have uniform distribution. So this would be organisms are spread out evenly throughout the ecosystem. So that'd be option A right there. So evenly distributed throughout the ecosystem. Very, very rare that we get uniform distribution. Sometimes individuals might compete for moisture, nutrients, light, and space. You might see a little bit in the desert. You also see uniform distribution a lot in man-made parks. So trees evenly spaced out throughout the park, or bushes put in a certain area. But generally in nature, you don't see a lot of uniform distribution. You might see random distribution, so just randomly organisms spread out throughout the ecosystem. This would be where biotic and abiotic factors have little effect. So something like a rainforest, tropical rainforest. Tons of sun, tons of water, tons of space, good soil. Really limiting factors don't really matter as much. So now you might see plants growing everywhere or animals being all over the place, spread out kind of randomly. Generally though, this is also pretty rare. You don't see a lot of random distribution in nature. What you usually see is something called clumped distribution. So all of the organisms clumped in one area. So for example, we see herds of animals, schools of fish, flocks of birds. They're all kind of clumped together in one area. Why? Well, they clump wherever there's food, water, shelter, etc. Wherever those things are abundant, you're going to have a high population density. And then where those things are not abundant, you'll have a much lower population density. Now, how do we measure and model population change? Well, we need to look at how N, the number of individuals, will change over T time. So N can change in a couple of ways. So a change in N we refer to as delta N. So how does N change? Well, N can change through 4 factors. We can have natality, which is our births. So how many organisms are born? This would increase our population size. So this would increase our population size. Natality would increase our population size. Then we have mortality, how many organisms have died. And this, of course, would decrease our population size. So we can look at it as natality increasing, mortality decreasing. If it was a closed population, meaning organisms couldn't leave or other organisms couldn't get in, these would be your only 2 factors affecting delta N. So if more organisms were born than died, you have a positive population growth. If you have more died than were born, you have a negative population growth, and if it was equal, you have 0 growth. However, we know that not all populations are closed systems. Some are open populations, so then we might allow both immigration and emigration. Immigration would be organisms entering the population, so this would increase, and emigration would be decreasing because organisms would be leaving the population. So if you have yourself an open population, to calculate delta N, you'll simply take the births plus immigration and subtract the deaths plus the emigration. So basically factors that will increase your population size and factors that will decrease your population size. And then what you'll do is take that delta N and then divide it by your time, which is delta T. Delta T might be a time period of a month, a year, 10 years, whatever that ends up being, that's your growth rate. So for example, the population of skunks grew by 2 skunks every year. So that would be a positive growth rate. Now we can see some changes here. A population explosion would be a rapid growth rate. Like you grow like crazy, exponentially. A population crash would be a rapid decrease, And then we would have that kind of stableness where it might go up and down, positive one year, negative the next, but kind of remain stable in kind of that middle ground there. So growth rate, one more time, delta N, which is your change in the number of individuals in the population, divided by delta T, which is your time period. Now, we can then look at something called per capita growth rate, which is going to express your growth rate in terms of the existing population. So to calculate your per capita growth rate, or your CGR, what you're going to do is you're going to take your delta N and divide it by N, your original population. So you're taking the change, and you're taking the change and you're dividing it by the original. So you're going to take the change in N divided by the original population, and you have yourself your per capita growth rate. Now, there are some factors that will obviously affect the population's ability to grow. If there were nothing in place, so essentially a population had unlimited potential, you would have exponential growth and things would grow like crazy. However, we know that some things, well, some organisms would overrun, like bacteria would be everywhere. But we know that there are some other things playing a role here. So for example, the environment will resist exponential growth to a certain point. So once you reach your carrying capacity, so the total amount of organisms that the ecosystem can support, your environment's going to start pushing down with things such as competition for oxygen in this case, low food supply, disease, predators, limited space. All of these factors are going to keep the fish population at a certain level. It can't go past this level because you can't exceed your carrying capacity. If you go too high, you're going to drop back down. Or you might go up a little bit and then drop back down. So this is a stable population right here, right? This is a stable population where they've reached their carrying capacity and they grow and maintain around that carrying capacity. Like I said before, if there were unlimited resources, no limiting factors, we would have something where you could grow like crazy. Now, what would your maximum potential be? This is referred to as your biotic potential. And you factor a few things here. So this is the maximum number of offspring that can be produced under ideal conditions, no resistance. So you need to factor in how many offspring do you have, how likely are they to survive, how often will you reproduce, and when do your offspring reach sexual maturity. Factor all those things together, you'll get an organism's biotic potential. But as I said, even though you may have a high biotic potential, the environment will resist you reaching that potential. So things like density-dependent factors, right? Factors that will impact your population due to high numbers. This could be predation, starvation, competition, disease, even density-independent factors, where they're factors that, regardless of population size, can still have an impact on population numbers. So this could be weather, hurricanes, droughts, climate change. Things like that could have an impact on your population numbers. So then we look at two different growth curves. So the S-shaped growth curve would look like this, where we have a, right, growth where it's growing, you reach your carrying capacity, and then you live about stable near that carrying capacity. So organisms that generally have a S-shaped growth curve, they live for a long time, their offspring live a long time, good survival rate, longer parental care than normal, or just parental care in general, usually smaller sizes in terms of the amount of offspring they have, and these species we refer to as K-selected, so a K-selected strategist. A J-shaped curve would look more like this. So this is an organism that will just take off like crazy. Usually these organisms don't live very long, so they don't live long enough to live at the carrying capacity. They end up dying off pretty quick. High infant mortality, little parental care, tons of individuals born. We call these R-selected species. So an example of a K-selected species, we could choose any mammal, right? We can choose a moose, that would be a K-selected species. And an R-selected species, a good example of that would be insects. Now, when we look at population growth over time, we can actually put it into histograms. So when we put it into a population histogram, we're looking at the age distribution of the population, as well as differences between males and females. So on the x-axis of the graph, we're looking at differences between males and females. On the y-axis, we're looking at the age distribution in intervals. So in this case, we're looking at 5-year intervals. So here's a population, this is Canada in 2016. We notice that in Canada, we have a good portion of our individuals here from age 15 to 34, and a large chunk of our population, whoops, zoom in a little farther, 50 to 60, right? So those would be your baby boomers, right? 50 to 60, large portion of our population right there in that age range. And then we notice some differences, right? As we get older, females tend to outlive males. So we tend to see a larger portion of females living into their 70s and 80s and 90s as opposed to males. We can look at histograms and then compare countries. So for example, the Democratic Republic of Congo is a rapid growth, very, very young population. We see most of its population is here in the bottom at the young age range. So they've had a rapid population growth, a lot of young people. US is slow growth, so kind of stable. No booms or busts really, everything is kind of stable there. All the age ranges are about equal. And then in Germany, we have negative growth, where similar to Canada, the majority of the population, or a large portion of the population, is getting older, and there's less young people entering into the population. This could be that people are waiting longer to have kids, people aren't having as many kids, and this leads into a bit of negative growth for Germany. So that's all I have for you today on population growth, how we model population growth, and some factors affecting population growth. Next lesson, we're going to talk about some relationships among species, some interactions within species, within a population, and then ultimately how an ecosystem can change through time through the process of succession. So thanks again for watching, and we'll chat soon.